Novelty is not necessarily good or nice. Novelty is complex. That's what it is. And so I see really a concatenation of tendencies and forces here at the end. It's only going to get weirder. The level of contradiction is going to rise excruciatingly, even beyond the excruciating present levels of contradiction. So I think it's just going to get weirder and weirder and weirder, and finally it's going to be so weird that people are going to have to talk about how weird it is. And at that point, novelty theory can come out of the woods, because eventually people are going to say, what the hell is going on? It's just too nuts. It's not enough to say it's nuts. You have to explain why it's so nuts. So between now and 2012, the next 14 years, I look for the invention of artificial life, the cloning of human beings, possible contact with extraterrestrials, possible human immortality, and at the same time, appalling acts of brutality, genocide, race baiting, homophobia, famine, starvation, because the systems which are in place to keep the world sane are utterly inadequate to the forces that have been unleashed. The collapse of the socialist world, the rise of the internet, these are changes so immense, nobody could imagine them ever happening. And now that they have happened, nobody even bothers to mention what a big deal it is. The fact that there is no such thing as the Soviet Union, people never talk about it anymore. But when I was a kid, the notion that that would ever change was beyond conceiving. So the good news is that as primates, we're incredibly adaptable to change. Put us in a desert, we survive. Put us in the jungle, we survive. Under Hitler, we survive. Under Nixon, we survive. We can put up with about anything, and it's a good thing because we're going to be tested to the limits. The breakdown of anything, and this is why the right wing is so alarmed, because what they see going on is the breakdown of all tradition, all order, all sanctioned norms of behavior. And they're quite right that it's happening, but they're quite wrong to conclude that it should be resisted or is somehow evil. The mushroom said to me once, it said, this is what it's like when a species prepares to depart for the stars. You don't depart for the stars under calm and orderly conditions. It's a fire in a madhouse. And that's what we have, the fire in the madhouse at the end of time. This is what it's like when a species prepares to move on to the next dimension. The entire destiny of all life on the planet is tied up in this. We are not acting for ourselves or from ourselves. We happen to be the point species on a transformation that will affect every living organism on this planet at its conclusion. Novelty theory is something I've been working on since the early 70s, inspired by psychedelic plant experiences in the Amazon, to attempt to look at time and really deconstruct it and attempt to understand what it is. And this has been a wild intellectual ride leading to some pretty easily stated conclusions. One is that novelty, which is my term for complexity or advanced organization, novelty increases as we approach the present moment. The universe you and I are living in is a far more novel and complicated place than the early universe was. Well, some people would say, well, that's just a consequence of the unfolding of developmental processes. But this asks the question, what are developmental processes? Why should the universe have a preference for order over disorder, especially when we have something called the second law of thermodynamics, which tells us exactly the opposite. Physicists believe the universe is running down ultimately into a state of disorder. But what I see is everywhere the emergence of more and more complex forms, languages, organisms, technologies, always building on the previously achieved levels of complexity. So that was one of my insights. Coming out of that insight was the further understanding that this process of complexification through time is not proceeding at a steady rate. It actually follows a kind of asymptotic curve. In other words, it's happening faster and faster. And this was a revelation to me because it allowed me philosophically to contextualize the human world and to understand that human technologies, languages, migrations, art movements, ideologies are not something different from nature. They're the same process that we see in the movement of continents, the evolution of new species of animals, except that these human novel emergent situations are happening much more quickly. So I see the cosmos, if you will, as a kind of novelty-producing engine, a kind of machine which produces complexity in all realms, physical, chemical, social, whatever, and then uses that achieved level of complexity as the platform for further complexity. Well, this explains our present circumstance. It explains the rush toward all forms of new technology and social organization in the new millennium. But you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand that if the universe is complexifying faster and faster, an epoch, a time will come when this rate of complexification is occurring so rapidly that it will become itself the overwhelming phenomena in the world of three-dimensional space and time. And I call this the omega point, or the transcendental object at the end of history. And I believe it is not that far off, that with the emergence of global internet, a human population of several billions, an electronic noosphere, that we are now within the shadow of this transcendental object at the end of time. Our religions sense it. That's what gives them their apocalyptic intuitions. And I think the ordinary man and woman in the street sense a kind of built-in acceleration to time itself. Well, rather than dismissing that or treating it as a psychological perception or something unique to our society, I took it as a basic perception about physics, and have built elaborate mathematically defined theories around this idea, and then have found, to my astonishment, incredible congruences with other work. I'm thinking of the Mayan calendar and its curious countdown-like quality toward an extremely unique event that the Maya felt would occur in the same time frame that my own equations predicted, even though at the time I was unaware of the Maya. So what we have here is a new model of time based on a very real intuition that I think most people share, which is that time is speeding up, that human beings are part of that process, and that the culmination of that process is now within the ven of historical time. In other words, I believe it will happen in 2012, in December, coincident with the same events that the Maya placed at the end of their calendar. Even if I'm wrong, even if it's 100 years or 500 years later, these are still spans of time that, when compared to the life of the planet, are fractions of a percentage. So whether you believe, as I do, that we can know the precise moment of this transformation of the world of time, or whether you believe it is simply coming soon and fast really doesn't make that much difference. We are all gathered here at the end game of developmental processes on this planet. We are about to become unrecognizable to ourselves as a species. Our technologies, our religions, our science has pushed us toward this for thousands of years without us awakening to what the denouement would be. Now we stand close enough to it that I think all but the most lumpen among us must feel the tug of the transcendental and the transformative.
We're living in a time where thinking critically is more important than ever, yet the media often pushes narratives that are intended to manipulate rather than inform. Having the right tools helps you stay grounded and see through the bias. A tool I enjoy using is today's sponsor, Ground News, an app and website that aggregates news from all over the world in one place. For every news story, I get a quick visual breakdown of the outlets covering the story, along with their political bias, how factual the source is, which entity owns the source, so I can compare how different sources cover the same story. For example, with this recent story about Neuralink's second trial implant, I can see that over 60 sources are covering this story. On the bias distribution chart, we can see that it's mostly covered by the left and right. If I scroll down, I can see every article and compare headlines. One headline emphasizes Elon's ambitious long-term vision for Neuralink, while the other focuses on the practical application of the technology in a real patient. It's great to compare articles, because it gives me a bird's eye view at the narratives that are being pushed. Ground News also helps me spot my own biases. I can see if I'm getting stuck only viewing sources that favor my beliefs. With the world being so polarized and most media aiming to manufacture ideologies, Ground News has developed a blind spot page to show you articles that are disproportionately reported by the left or right. So if you're looking for a way to be informed without being misinformed, subscribe to Ground News through my link, ground.news/afterschool, to get 40% off the Vantage plan for unlimited access to every feature. This is the plan I use. Ground News is doing important work, and I hope you check them out.